Hello, Latina professionals, and anyone who is joining today. Welcome to this session on public speaking as well as confidence when speaking. If you are here for the session on, let's get it ready, mastering Q&A sessions, handling audience interactions with grace, you are absolutely in the right place. And so if you haven't already, definitely let us know where you're joining from, the industry you're in, and what you're looking to learn today. We have many folks who come in week after week for each session on public speaking, as well as from our other speakers, including Norma on Latina mental health, as well as Danny on career as well as promotion. And so if you've been attending these sessions, let us know in the chat. If this is your first session you've ever come to, let us know too. We want to make sure that you're building your network, not only with us as speakers, but everyone who's in the audience, because we all have something to share. All right, checking out the comments, see who's here today. To introduce myself just a little bit before we go into the presentation, I'm joining from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm in the professional training and coaching industry. And what I'm looking to learn today from y'all is what your experiences have been doing Q&A sessions. I've heard time and honestly time again from many folks that I've worked with who want to build their confident public speaking in 25 days or less, that they can prepare for a presentation, 20-minute, 30-minute presentation. They can practice it 100 times. They can have their notes. They can read off their slides, and they can feel 100% confident. But if it comes to the Q&A, if there's a Q&A at all for their presentation, that's often where they tend to crumble, where they fold, where they might freeze, where they might race in their speaking and try to end the answer as soon as possible, not feeling confident in what they said. So that's why I wanted to have a session that was very specific to that Q&A session, because a Q&A session is where we can really lead with our expertise and let people know that we've really thought and considered the topics that folks are presenting to us on the spot, and that we can answer in a measured, competent, and confident tone as well. I'm seeing so many folks joining us today, which I know at the time of this recording, it's before the July 4th holiday. So a lot of folks coming in before the holiday. So excellent to see some new folks, including, for example, Maria. It's our first session, joining from Arizona. Elvira, also first time here, fantastic. Saeed, in the IT industry as well. And if you haven't thought about it, or maybe you haven't yet gotten permission to do so, definitely consider adding the folks who are in the audience to your LinkedIn network. You know you have something in common, which is a strong desire to build your leadership as well as your confidence. And with that too, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can send me a direct message letting me know that you attended this talk. You can connect with me so that I can be in your network as well. And I'd love to have conversations as well in the direct messages, or continue sharing posts that you find helpful regarding your public speaking and confidence journey. But let's see, a lot more folks coming in. We got a hello from Alejandra in Oregon. All right, Luz from Indiana. Danielle in San Diego in the nonprofit and education industries. And so if you're in those industries or you're looking to break into those industries, definitely connect with Danielle. All right. Oh, Noemi, great to see that this is the first session that you've been to as we go along as well. So let me take off this banner here, get started here as well. I'm already seeing some questions in the chat. Perfect for a Q&A focus session. So I'll make sure that we have that time at the end of this presentation to really focus on those Q&As as well. For example, Susan has a question here. All right, how do you handle silence when you want folks engaged? I'm not going to answer that yet. I'll answer it at the end of the presentation, but if any of y'all have insight, definitely share that with Susan and share that to benefit our community here with Latina professionals. To introduce myself a bit further, my name is Sammy. Hey, y'all. And I am a public speaking and confidence coach with Speak Y'all. And I help executive level leaders and those aspiring to those C-suite level roles. So for example, chief financial officer, chief information officer, chief executive officer, really build their long-term confidence through a committed speaking practice, expert feedback, and that accountability. it can be really hard to build skills in anything if we're not practicing diligently and we don't feel like we have a support system on our side. I've personally coached 50 plus leaders to speak confidently in their executive meetings, in high stake interviews, while gaining recognition for their work. And speaking on the spot is something that really stands out to me. As someone whose mind used to race 1,000 miles a minute, recognizing the power of my speaking to really filter and address the racing thoughts I had in my head has made it a lot easier for me to not only present as a confident and competent professional, but to actually identify as one. There's something to speaking confidently, but still not believing in ourselves. And I do this work because I know it takes a longer time to embed that belief that I am enough, that I am an expert, and that I deserve to take space in the room. If that's something that resonates with you, don't hesitate to include that in the chat. I'm here for you and I want to support you, as well as this community here too. Seeing a lot more first timers for a Latina professionals topic here as well. So fantastic. If you haven't yet introduced yourself, do so. And if you're watching the recording, hello. Everything here is still welcome for you to connect with our community. So speaking on the spot, one thing that really stands out to a lot of the clients that I've worked with when they were deciding, how do I want to speak? What is my speaking style? Was, well, when I see leaders speak, I recognize that they're not tripped up. They're not phased when someone asks them a question on the spot, even if it's one that's challenging. They see these speakers as speaking a bit slower, speaking very articulately, engaging the audience and recognizing the person who asked them the question, and overall having this presence about them that shares that they're a leader. So with that, it's really important to think, hey, when I am doing a Q&A session, whether this is my first Q&A session, whether this is one of many Q&A sessions that I'm preparing for, but I'm super nervous about, we really want to think about what can set you up for success to handle not only the types of questions and the content people will ask for, but also how you carry yourself as a professional as well. Okay. Now I'm curious, how many of y'all have had a Q&A or have one coming up in the next week or so? Let me know in the chat. I would love to hear and see if this talk is relevant to you or if it's timely as well. All right. Now, when we're getting started, the first thing I recommend for folks regarding Q&A sessions is to do their research. It's really important to get a sense and feel a lot more confident as an expert if you know in general what types of questions people will ask. So for example, I also coach people on their interviewing, and the way I like to think about it is interview questions aren't just impromptu. If you're hoping to join an interview and wing it, it's not going to work. Interviewing is mainly preparing answers, preparing structured stories to answer questions in effective and impactful ways in under 2 minutes. And a Q&A can be thought of as like a mini interview after a presentation. The way that you can think about it is, okay, what are the natural questions I would have if someone gave this presentation? And these questions aren't always challenging questions. They aren't always heckles from someone, right? We can think of heckling comedians, for example. Not everyone is out to ask questions to make you not look like the expert that you are. Sometimes you get a question that is a very fantastic question, and it's hard to say, I don't know. So let's talk about what it means to do some of that research before the presentation. One thing that doubles up not only as research, but also practice is giving a rehearsal of your presentation, but not only rehearsing to yourself. It can be really helpful to rehearse to another colleague, someone in your network, or even a family member or a friend. If you don't have the time to rehearse, first off, you should always have the time to rehearse. Rehearsing is very key for strong public speaking for a presentation. But let's say your network or your colleagues don't have the time to listen to a presentation. There's a couple things that you can do. You can record your presentation for them to review after and ask them in general, what are the types of questions you would ask? You can also send people an outline of the presentation. So perhaps you have filled out the notes section of the slide deck and you say, hey, based on these notes, based on this topic, what are some of the natural questions that come along as well? So I'd love to hear. I see already folks talking about the types of presentations they give, but let me know, what are the types of presentations you're giving? What are some of the topics that you've addressed with audience, whether within your organization or outside of your organization? If you're a speaker yourself, let us know what you speak about. And that can be really helpful to get a sense of what are the types of questions that other people could ask. Let's see here. I see Susan here. I regularly host webinars and trainings for student advocates and allow time for Q&A by the students for myself or for guest speakers. Yes, it's very important to build in that buffer time, which is, again, another very critical reason why rehearsing a presentation is key. You might have an hour set for the presentation, 40 minutes presenting, 20 minutes for Q&A. But if your presentation's going 50 minutes and only 10 minutes for Q&A, that can really limit the opportunities for your audience to get a lot more engaged. Let's see. Mariette teaches about financial literacy. Fantastic. A fellow Samantha here. Social media marketing for nonprofit organizations and recruiting for students. Bernardo, we have Hispanic marketing strategy. Excellent. Nayeli, leadership, confidence, communication skills. Joining the club here, Nayeli, that's fantastic. And Maribet is saying time management is key. There are a number of organizations that require interviewees to prepare a presentation or a workshop. And if they say you're giving a 10-minute presentation, that presentation better be 9:59 or under, because it's not just about that time management in the moment, but it's also about building relationships. If, for example, we see here many students working with, many folks here working with students, for example, Susan talked about working with students. If a professor gave her 10 minutes to present in the class and she spoke for 20 minutes, she might not get an invitation to that class anymore, because it's really important to make sure that we're sticking around the parameters for what the other people need. Because presentations aren't about us and how much of an expert we are. It's about what we share to other people and how we help them build. Fantastic. Well, I want to show y'all another way that you can possibly do your research, especially if you're building skills using ChatGPT or you feel like you're already a ChatGPT whiz. Let me know in the comments if you've ever used ChatGPT, how often you use it. But this is a way that can be really helpful for you to do some of your research and feel like you're preparing for that Q&A and not just the presentation. So here, and I'll make the screen a lot bigger here, I put into ChatGPT, I'm giving a 30-minute presentation on how to prepare for Q&A sessions as someone building her public speaking skills. I'm talking about doing research before speaking, good breathing techniques to regulate the nervous system, and having a structure. So that's a little bit of a future of what our presentation will look like. You're an audience member. So now I'm telling ChatGPT, you're an audience member of this presentation. What are some natural questions that come to you? Some of these can be challenging questions. If you want to, feel free to take a screenshot of this prompt. Feel free to write it down. I see over here, Alejandra is a big fan and user of ChatGPT. And the idea with ChatGPT is that, for example, for these presentations, I don't use ChatGPT to write my topics, but I often will use it to get more of a sense of what are the questions that are coming up, what are the next steps, what are possible topics people can be interested in. But that allows me to have that base to be creative with the content that I put in these presentations. So I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit more if you want to take a screenshot, because this can be really helpful for you if you're giving an hour-long presentation on cybersecurity, where you're focusing on a specific breach and you want to get a sense of what are the types of questions. Now, I will postulate here, I'm also not a lawyer, but I have heard it's really important to make sure you're not putting company information, like company secrets, proprietary information, in something like ChatGPT. So you want to keep it as open as possible while it's still helping you prepare for your presentation. So I'll give that notice there, or disclaimer here as well. So I want to show you what ChatGPT shared. Well, first off, ChatGPT shared 10 questions, but I'm only going to share 3 with you because then this would be a way longer presentation, and I'm trying to make sure I stick to my promise for time management. Okay. So these are the first 3 questions that ChatGPT came up with regarding that topic. And they might be too general, they might be too specific, so we can always play around with that in the future. The first one is, how do you recommend conducting research before a Q&A session? Are there any specific sources or strategies you find most effective? As I've mentioned earlier, doing that dress rehearsal with other people in the audience so they can let you know what the questions they would ask are important, as well as using a tool like ChatGPT. The next one, could you share some examples of breathing techniques that could help regulate the nervous system before public speaking? Now you see, I will be giving an example of a technique, so maybe someone doesn't ask that question, but maybe they ask about other breathing techniques, or why I learned that, or hey, I'm a yoga teacher, how can I teach this to other folks? So you see how these individual questions not only give you a sense of what are the questions someone might ask after the presentation, but it gives you a sense of what are the questions I should be answering during the presentation. What should my presentation be addressing so that folks don't have these questions because they already feel that they've been answered? And then the last one is about structure. So what elements or components should be included in the structure of presentation to ensure a smooth Q&A session? Fantastic question here. And again, getting more of a sense of what someone could ask makes it a lot easier to already include those elements in your presentation. So let me know in the chat too, is that something that you plan to use? Do you plan to use ChatGPT to help you with those Q&As? And if you have more questions about that after this presentation, do not hesitate to connect with me here on LinkedIn and ask me some questions in the direct messages. And we're going to move on to deep breathing, because often what I find with folks who are feeling confident about the presentation but not confident about the Q&A is a lot of that sense of uncertainty. And that can really rock the nervous system. Now, when folks are starting a presentation, often their nerves can be up here, but then it tends to plateau and it tends to dip down with just more and more time on the air, for example, time recorded or time speaking. Prior to a Q&A, if you know that's an area where you feel quite a bit nervous, it can be helpful to build a habit or build a practice of deep breathing. Now, what I want to say is deep breathing can be very helpful during a presentation, but it's like a tool in our toolbox for emotional regulation. If we forget it's in the toolbox, or if we forget to practice using that tool to know how to use it, I will admit I pulled a measuring tape a couple of weeks ago and I forgot that you shouldn't let it snap back into your hand, and I cut my hand pretty bad. It's important to make sure you have a good tutorial or practice with the tools that you use, is that we want to practice deep breathing as something that's more of a daily practice rather than right when I'm speaking. Because we want to make sure that it's something that we can use when we need it and not forget that we have that tool. Now, let me know in the chat, how many of y'all are familiar with box breathing? This is my trying to interpret a square as best as possible here. Let me know in the chat if you've experienced it, if you tried it, or even taught box breathing. Ooh, Elvira is also talking about not only deep breathing, but affirmations as well. And affirmations can be very helpful. Affirmation doesn't have to be something that feels like a hyperbole or feels like an exaggeration or lie, like I'm the world's best public speaker. The affirmation doesn't have to be something like that, but it can be, I speak about what I'm interested in. I love sharing what I know to other people. Public speaking gets easier every single time I do it. These types of affirmations are a lot more accessible. They feel a lot more aligned with the truth. And they are true because it's something that gets a lot easier as you go along. So I hope that's helpful for you if we're embedding some affirmations into our experience as well. I see someone here has recommended box breathing to their therapy clients. So let's practice it together. Now, this is a GIF. It's not GIFing right now, which is totally fine. But the way that box breathing works, the square, is 4 seconds of breathing in, 4 seconds of holding that breath, 4 seconds of breathing out, and 4 seconds of holding the breath out. So no breath in the lungs for the most part. It's something that can be easily done without other people noticing that you're doing that box breathing. And so we can practice it a couple of times together if you're interested and if this is something you're able to do as well. So let's do the breathing in, and I'll count down with my fingers. Breathe in. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can pause here. Feel free to continue doing some of the box breathing on your own here. This is something that can be helpful to do and try for 30 seconds. Try for a minute, build up to 2 minutes, build up to 3 minutes as well. The box breathing can be really helpful to have that sense of, I am safe, I'm okay, I'm in my body. Because a lot of times when we're feeling nervous, we start breathing really heavily or even forgetting to breathe. I'm actually working with someone currently who, when she was feeling pretty nervous speaking, and she was doing speaking practices I assigned to her, when I was watching her videos to give feedback, I noticed at the end of a sentence, I would hear, and I realized through that she was speaking entire long sentences without breathing, and she wasn't aware of it. And again, that's something that I speak to when working with a coach or a consultant, is oftentimes we don't know what we need to work on, or we don't know that we're breathing a lot, blinking a lot, not breathing at all. And it's very helpful to get feedback from that third party who's able to look out and say, hey, this can be helpful for you. So we made sure to embed some breathing practice and quite a bit more pauses and slowing down. So it was a lot easier for her to catch her breath. Because as she caught her breath and was able to breathe more regularly, speaking felt a lot less stressful for her. Elvira, I love what we're talking about affirmations still. In your minds, say you are safe to calm your brain's response. And it is true. No matter what we're speaking about and who we're speaking to, we are safe, even if it's high pressure, even if we feel worried about fear of judgment and some of that embarrassment as well. Thank you. Okay, so deep breathing. I'm curious, are there other breathing techniques you've used in the past? I know one tool I've used quite a bit as well, just for general wellness. Breathing is very key in practices such as meditation, is a tool called Insight Timer. Insight Timer is an app that's free that you can use to find different breathing exercises, different meditations, and even different calming music that can be helpful for someone, especially if they feel like, hey, I need some extra tools to calm down before a Q&A or before a presentation. So definitely highly recommend Insight Timer for folks. And I'm not an affiliate. This is not an ad. This is something I just use in my personal life that I wholly recommend for folks. Let's see, Camila, breathing has always been a method for calming down mind and heart racing. Really glad to hear that that's really helpful for you. And especially as an interpreter, that's quite a lot of public speaking. And so that's something that can be really helpful, not only in your profession, but anyone else who has speaking as part of what they do. Thank you all for sharing different tools and tips that are helpful for you. This helps me grow as a professional just as much as it helps anyone who is here in our audience today. Now, I want to go back to something I taught way back in ancient times. May 2023, in the first session that I hosted here for Latina professionals. And I find this is helpful repeating, especially because many of you are here in a Latina professional session for the first time, or might want to use a bit of a reinforcer or refresher on this topic. And this is one of the first things that I teach folks who become my clients, who are really committed to addressing their fear of public speaking in an efficient and effective manner. And the way to do that is to answer questions using PRP format. So the PRP format is answering a question, the point, which is usually one sentence answering the question, the reason, and then the point again. And that point, those 2 points can be the exact same line. That can be really helpful for adding a bit of structure and knowing where you're going and what you're speaking. But it's something that needs to be practiced quite a bit. So I'd love to ask, is there anyone here who has like a random question for me? And when I say personal question, I don't mean like hyper personal, but just a question about my life or something that I can answer for you using this point, reason, point structure. I will answer this question for Zuli before I answer any other questions here. So are we supposed to repeat the question? Zuli, what I find really helpful when being in a Q&A is repeating that initial question. Sometimes when we're in a speaking engagement, whether it's in person or over Zoom, not everyone caught that question. Whether it was because the microphone wasn't loud enough, there was no microphone, it was on the Zoom chat for half a second and then disappeared. I always find it very helpful to repeat the question because it not only allows everyone to know what question we're on and to be on the same page, but it does help the person who asked the question feel heard. If it's a very long question, I recommend clarifying the question, saying, oh, when you ask this, do you mean X or do you mean Y? Can be really helpful because, again, that helps the listener and it helps the question asker feel really heard and make sure the question's going in the right direction. So for that, Zuli, I totally recommend repeating the question for the Q&A. I see Camila has a question for me. Do I have any pets? I do have a pet, and that's a cat named Lily. Lily has been my cat for about a month, actually, and she has just recently recovered from a spay surgery and bounced back within a couple of days. I feel really grateful to have her around my apartment. She, ironically, for the cat of a public speaking coach, or not even ironically, very, very reasonably, as the cat of a public speaking coach, she talks a lot. She loves to meow. She loves to get my attention. She loves pets. So anytime I'm hosting a presentation like this, I do lock her up in a different room. So I do have a pet, and that's a cat named Lily. Thank you. Let's see, another question. What's the greatest challenge to public speaking when you are not the expert in the room? Zuli, what I find is the greatest challenge for public speaking when we feel like we're not the expert in the room is that sense of not belonging in the room or not having an expertise at all. We may not be the main person with the most experience, but we are a person who has experience. And not only hearing ourselves speak, but being able to speak up and sharing what we know when directed to speak or when we have the opportunity to speak is still important. So what I find that greatest challenge to public speaking is that speaking up at all and feeling like we don't belong or we don't deserve to speak just because we're not always the biggest expert in the field. Mindset is really important, and I hope that was helpful for you. Clara, how long have you been a public speaking coach? I'm going to assume that coach is the end of the question there. I've been a public speaking coach since January 2022. And I know a lot of people might ask, oh, wow, that's not the longest amount of time. But I've actually been a coach in general, specifically career coaching, for the last decade. And so what I find and what I love about the coaching industry is coaching is a lot about building relationships. It's a lot about impromptu public speaking. It's a lot about sharing what I know and helping reframe people's experience. And so when I decided and learned from a great friend of mine how to be a public speaking coach, I realized, wow, I can live transferable skills. I don't just have to talk about transferable skills in the context of job search. And so I've been a public speaking coach for about a year and a half now. So we'll pause the questions here. I hope y'all were able to see a bit of what PRP looks like, or point, reason, point. And I will let you know, I did not ask Camila to ask about my cat. I did not ask Glada to ask me about how long I've been a public speaking coach. It's something that comes with practice and time, is getting used to using a structure like this to feel confident and comfortable when answering questions. So we'll leave it up for any more Q&A. You guys have already been asking fantastic questions throughout this presentation. And I'll also be sure to answer questions after this presentation using LinkedIn, connecting with you all for messages, and being part of this Latina professionals community. So feel free to put any more questions you have in the chat. I want to remind y'all that there's another presentation I'm hosting this upcoming week on July 10th called Building a Strong Stage Presence, Inspiring the Room. And the goal is to really build upon many of the things we've learned throughout these presentations on having effective body language, on vocal delivery, on carrying yourself like an executive, and really believing in yourself when you're taking the stage or you're taking the Zoom room. So definitely join for that session. I would love to invite you for this session as well as any other session that is hosted by Latina professionals. So definitely check that out on their LinkedIn page. If you're interested in working with me, you're curious about what public speaking coaching looks like, you feel like you're struggling to feel and sound confident speaking, definitely reach out to me. I'd love to make sure that you have the right resources in hand. And join our Latina professionals community. I'm here on Mondays at noon Eastern time, and you can also catch me at speakyall.com and Sammy at speakyall.com. There is a membership through Latina professionals that you can join where you can connect with leaders on different professional development topics and continue building this community. So it's not just once or twice a week, but you're really feeling like you have that support. You folks have your back as well. So definitely drop any more questions in the comments. I'd love to answer them after this presentation. But thank you all so much for your time today. Always excited to hop on LinkedIn Live to connect with y'all and make sure that you have the resources that you need to feel confident as a speaker. Take care.